You have an account no one ever taught you to manage. It doesn't hold money. It holds something rarer, something you cannot borrow, cannot inherit, and cannot buy back once it's gone for the day. Every time you explain yourself to someone who was never going to understand, you make a withdrawal. Every time you narrate your next move before you've taken it, you make a withdrawal. Every time you let a stranger's passing opinion decide how the rest of your day feels. Withdrawal, withdrawal, withdrawal. Nobody sends you a statement. There's no balance you can check on an app. You only discover the account is empty at the worst possible moment. When you reach for your own resolve in a hard conversation, a hard decision, a hard morning, and find there's nothing left to spend. The old Stoics ran their lives differently. Not because they had more willpower than you. Not because life was gentler to them. Marcus Aurelius buried his own children and fought wars for a decade while writing the words we still quote today. They understood something almost nobody manages to grasp now. That a mind, like a reserve, only grows when it's protected. Spend it everywhere, on everyone, all day, and it doesn't matter how strong you started out. You'll run dry by noon. Over the next while, we're going to walk through exactly where your reserve is leaking. In your mornings, your work, your relationships, your private thoughts, and exactly how the Stoics built a mind that filled up instead of draining out. This isn't a highlight reel of quotes. It's a full rebuild. If you've ever finished a day where nothing dramatic happened and still felt completely emptied out, stay with me. This one is for you. Let's start with an honest hour-by-hour account of an ordinary day, because the leak is never in the disasters. It's in the ordinary. You wake up. Before your eyes are fully open, your mind is already narrating to an invisible audience. I'm going to fix my sleep this week. I'm finally going to start eating properly. I'm done wasting evenings. None of this is false. You mean it in the moment. But notice what just happened. You haven't done a single thing yet, and you've already spent the satisfaction that was supposed to come from doing it. The announcement, even the private, silent, only to yourself announcement, produces a small chemical reward. Your brain treats the statement of intention as a partial substitute for the intention carried out. This is the first withdrawal of the day, and you made it before you were even out of bed. By the time you're dressed, you've checked your phone. Not because anything urgent happened, because the checking itself has become a reflex, the way your hand used to reach for a light switch in a dark room even after you moved out of that house years ago. You absorb a headline you didn't ask for, an opinion from someone you've never met, a stranger's outrage about something that will not matter to you in a week. None of it was addressed to you personally. All of it now lives uninvited in your nervous system for the next several hours. At work, the leak takes a different shape. A meeting runs long because 3 people are explaining their reasoning to each other in a room where the decision was already effectively made 20 minutes ago. You sit through it, not because your input is needed, but because leaving would look like you don't care. A colleague vents about office politics for the 4th time this week, and you nod along, spending attention you didn't budget for, on a problem that was never yours to solve. Somewhere in the middle of your actual work, a notification arrives, and even though you don't respond to it, your focus has already been interrupted. And focus, once broken, takes far longer to rebuild than it took to break. Then there's the defending. Someone questions a decision you made for good reasons, with the information you had in good faith. And instead of letting the decision stand on its own, you feel the pull to explain it, to justify it, to make sure they understand you weren't careless, weren't lazy, weren't wrong. You type a message, you delete it. You type a longer, more careful version with more evidence, more context, more proof. You send it. And you wait, checking, refreshing, hoping the right paragraph will finally make them see you the way you see yourself. It rarely does. And even when it does, notice the price you paid for that small relief. 20 minutes of attention, an hour of low-grade anxiety, and a piece of your peace handed directly to someone whose opinion of you was never going to change your actual life. By evening, you are tired in a way you can't fully explain because nothing happened today. No crisis, no emergency. Just 1,000 small withdrawals, each one too small to notice on its own, adding up to a balance of 0 by the time you sit down to rest. This is not a discipline problem. You did not fail today. You leaked. Quietly, invisibly, almost entirely with your own consent. And here is the part that stings the most. You volunteered nearly every one of those withdrawals. Nobody forced the explaining. Nobody forced the checking. Nobody forced the narrating. You handed it over piece by piece because you were never taught there was another way to hold it. There is. And the people who found it 23 centuries ago left detailed instructions. The Stoics had a word for the state of a mind that no longer bleeds out through 100 small openings, autarkeia. Self-sufficiency. Not isolation, not coldness, not indifference to other people. Simply this: a mind that has stopped requiring outside deposits to feel whole because it has stopped hemorrhaging from 1,000 invisible cuts. Picture 2 containers. The first is a faucet, always open, always running, always available to whoever turns the handle. Anyone can draw from it at any time. A stranger's opinion, a colleague's drama, your own racing thoughts about a conversation that hasn't even happened yet. The faucet doesn't discriminate. It simply pours, constantly, for anyone who asks. The second is a reserve. Sealed, deliberate, drawn from only when it matters. It fills quietly in the space between demands. It doesn't refuse to give. It simply refuses to give carelessly. Most people, without ever choosing to, live as the faucet. Always accessible. Always explaining. Always reacting. Always one notification away from spending themselves on something that will mean nothing by next week. And then they wonder, sincerely and painfully, why they feel hollowed out by things that never should have cost them anything in the first place. The Stoics built themselves deliberately as the reserve. Cato the Younger, one of the most disciplined men in Roman history, was famous for something almost nobody talks about today. He would let insults pass through a room without responding, not because he hadn't heard them, but because he had already decided, long before the insult was ever spoken, which things were worth his response and which were not. His silence wasn't weakness. It was a decision made in advance, so that in the moment there was no decision left to make. No energy spent deliberating, no withdrawal at all. Diogenes, the philosopher who lived by choice with almost nothing, was mocked constantly by wealthier men who assumed his lack of possessions meant a lack of power. He rarely defended himself. When asked why he didn't respond to an insult, he is said to have replied that dogs bark at people they don't recognize as their own kind. And he had no intention of proving to a stranger that he belonged to their pack. The insult cost him nothing, because he never opened the account it was trying to draw from. This is what the reserve looks like in practice. Not a person who feels nothing. A person who has decided ahead of time what is actually worth the spend, and who has the discipline to let everything else pass by untouched. Before we talk about how to build the reserve, we need to be honest about why it drains so easily in the first place. Because pretending this is simply a matter of trying harder sets you up to fail the same way you probably already have a dozen times. You are right now living inside systems that were not built to protect your reserve. They were built, in many cases, specifically to drain it, because your attention and your reactions are valuable to other people. Every app on your phone is engineered by teams of extremely intelligent people whose entire job is to interrupt your silence as often as possible. Because a mind that checks in constantly is a mind that can be sold to advertisers, one glance at a time. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's the business model. Your attention is the product, and your reserve is the raw material being extracted. Social conditioning plays its part too. From childhood, most of us were taught implicitly that our worth is confirmed from the outside. Good grades earned praise. Good behavior earned approval. Achievements were only fully real once someone else acknowledged them. By the time you're an adult, checking for external validation before trusting your own judgment isn't a character flaw. It's a habit that was installed in you, repetition by repetition, long before you had the capacity to question it. And there's a simpler, more physical reason too. Explaining yourself, defending a position, announcing a plan. These all produce a small hit of relief. The tension of being misunderstood, even briefly, is uncomfortable, and speaking up relieves that tension immediately. The problem is that immediate relief and long-term strength are very often at odds. The habit that feels best in the exact moment you're doing it is frequently the same habit quietly bankrupting you over the following weeks. None of this is meant to make you feel powerless. It's meant to do the opposite. Because once you can see the machinery clearly, you stop blaming yourself for the leak, and you can finally start patching it on purpose. Marcus Aurelius did not write his private journal, the collection we now call Meditations, to be read by anyone. He wrote it to himself at night in a tent on a military campaign he did not choose and could not escape. And one of the lines he returned to again and again wasn't about strategy or empire. It was this: waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Read that again slowly. He is not telling you to describe your goodness. He is not telling you to post about it, defend it, or convince a single other person of it. He is telling you that description is cheap, that explanation is cheap, and that demonstration is the only currency that was ever real. He would rather spend his reserve on the expensive, difficult, silent work of actually being disciplined than on the cheap, easy, public work of announcing that he was. Epictetus taught something almost identical from the opposite end of the social ladder entirely. He was born enslaved and spent years of his life owning nothing. Not property, not freedom, not even full legal claim to his own body. And from that position, stripped of almost everything a person could lose, he taught his students that there are 3 stages of a person's development. The untrained mind blames the world for everything that goes wrong. The partially trained mind blames itself instead. But the fully trained mind blames nothing at all. It simply observes, decides what's within its control, and acts. Notice what is completely absent from all 3 stages: an audience. Nowhere in his teaching does the fully developed person need someone watching to confirm they're doing it correctly. The confirmation was never supposed to come from outside. Seneca lived a far more dangerous version of proximity to power, as advisor to an emperor unstable enough to eventually order his own former teacher's death. In one of his letters to a friend, he wrote that most of what people call keeping busy is really just avoidance, filling every silence, every empty hour, so they never have to sit alone with an unfinished thought or an uncomfortable truth. He wasn't describing laziness. He was describing exactly what happens when a person's reserve runs so low that stillness itself starts to feel unbearable, and they reach for noise the way someone reaches for a drink to avoid a difficult conversation with themselves. Musonius Rufus, who taught Epictetus before Epictetus taught anyone else, put it almost bluntly. He said the proof of a philosopher isn't in their words at all. It's in what they can bear without complaint, and what they choose deliberately not to say. Not silence for its own sake. Silence as evidence that the real work is happening somewhere the audience can't see. And Zeno of Citium, who founded the entire school of Stoicism after surviving a shipwreck that cost him everything he owned, is remembered for a line so simple it's easy to underestimate. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we might listen twice as much as we speak. He wasn't offering a nice sentiment for a greeting card. He was handing down a ratio, a literal proportion for how a well-run mind spends its reserve. Listen twice as much as you speak. Observe twice as much as you react. Absorb twice as much as you broadcast. None of these men were suggesting you withdraw from the world, refuse to communicate, or become cold to the people around you. Every single one of them was pointing at the exact same leak, from a different angle. The compulsion to explain, perform, and prove yourself to people who were never going to hand you back what you spent. This isn't only a philosophy for quiet mornings and personal journaling. The leak shows up everywhere you live your actual life, and so does the reserve, once you know how to protect it. At work, the leak looks like over-explaining a decision to a manager who has already moved on to the next agenda item. It looks like defending your workload in a meeting instead of simply doing the work and letting the results speak. It looks like announcing a big new initiative before a single piece of it exists, spending the exact motivation you needed to actually build it. The reserve, by contrast, looks like doing the unglamorous, unwitnessed version of the work first, and only speaking once there's something real behind the words. People who operate this way are often underestimated right up until the moment the results arrive. And then they're never underestimated again. In relationships, the leak looks like needing your partner, your friend, your family to constantly confirm that you're right, that you're valued, that you're not the problem. It looks like rehearsing arguments in the shower for conversations that haven't happened and might never happen. It looks like scrolling through a friend's life and measuring your own against a version of theirs that isn't even real. The reserve looks like being fully present with the people in front of you instead, not because you're trying harder to be a good partner or friend, but because you've stopped spending your attention on the 20 other places it usually leaks to. People can feel the difference between someone who is present and someone who is merely in the room. In creativity and personal projects, the leak looks like talking about the novel, the business, the course, the song, long before a single meaningful piece of it exists. Because talking about it feels like progress, and it isn't. The reserve looks like protecting the idea in its fragile early stage, doing the boring, invisible, repetitive work without an audience, and only opening your mouth once the thing can defend itself. In how you handle bad news, the leak looks like reacting instantly. A rant, a spiral, a search for someone to agree with your outrage. The reserve looks like a pause long enough to ask one simple question. Is this within my control or outside it? And spending your remaining energy only on the half of that answer that's actually yours to move. In your relationship with your own phone, the leak looks like reaching for it in literally any moment of unstructured silence. A red light, a cue, the 60 seconds before a meeting starts, because unstructured silence has started to feel like something to escape rather than something to use. The reserve looks like tolerating that 60 seconds of nothing and discovering, often to your own surprise, that your own thoughts are more interesting company than you'd been led to believe. Different rooms, same leak, same fix. Understanding the leak intellectually changes very little on its own. What changes something is the practice, specific, repeatable, unglamorous, done long before it feels natural. First, the first 10 minutes. Before your feet hit the floor, before the phone, before any input from outside enters your mind, you take 10 minutes of nothing. Not meditation in the formal sense, if that word puts you off. Just silence. No headlines, no messages, no other person's priorities loaded into your head before your own have had a chance to speak first. You ask yourself one question. What actually matters today? Not what feels urgent. What matters? The two are rarely the same thing, and you'll never be able to tell them apart if the first voice you hear every morning belongs to someone else. Second, the pause before defending. Someone criticizes something you made, said, or decided. The old reflex is to respond in real time, matching their sentence with a faster, sharper one of your own. The reserve response is different. Let the words land fully before reacting to them at all. Ask privately whether there's any truth in the criticism. If there is, take what's useful and let the rest go. If there isn't, let all of it go. Either way, notice how rarely a reply was actually necessary. Most criticism dissolves the moment you stop feeding it your attention. It was only ever as large as the energy you gave it. Third, the delay before announcing. You've started something new. A habit, a project, a change in direction. The urge to tell people about it immediately is almost chemical, because the telling produces a small reward that feels identical to progress. It is not progress. It's a preview, and previews spend the exact energy, the real thing needed to survive its difficult early stage. Let the work stay unglamorous and unwitnessed for longer than feels comfortable. Let it get boring, let it get hard, let it nearly fail in private before you let anyone clap for it. Fourth, the single question for chaos. Something goes wrong. A plan collapses, a person disappoints you, a number doesn't land where you hoped. The faucet response is immediate noise. A rant, a search for someone to validate your frustration, an hour lost to replaying it. The reserve response is a single question, asked calmly before anything else. Is this inside my control? If yes, you act, precisely, and without drama. If no, you let it pass through you the way weather passes through a landscape, fully but without leaving permanent damage. Fifth, the evening account. At the end of the day, instead of scrolling until your eyes close, take 2 minutes to ask where your reserve went. Where did you spend well? On presence, on real work, on a conversation that mattered? Where did you leak? On explaining, defending, comparing, reacting? You're not doing this to punish yourself. You're doing it the way a careful person checks a bank statement, not out of guilt, but out of respect for something valuable enough to track. None of this requires becoming distant, guarded, or cold toward the people you love. It requires becoming discerning about which moments are actually worth the spend, and having the discipline to protect the rest. Here is what almost nobody tells you about protecting your reserve instead of constantly spending it. The less you draw on it carelessly, the more powerful it becomes on the rare occasions you finally choose to use it. Say less, and the things you do say start to land differently, because people can feel, almost instantly, almost unconsciously, the difference between a reflex and a decision. React less, and your actual reactions, on the rare occasions you allow yourself one, carry a weight that constant reactivity never could. Explain yourself less, and paradoxically, people trust you more because a person who doesn't need to justify every move looks, to everyone watching, like a person who already knows something the room doesn't. Meanwhile, the person still operating as the faucet, always on, always available, always narrating their own life in real time, becomes strangely easy to tune out. Not because they're wrong about everything they say, because they've trained everyone around them that their words are unlimited, always available, and therefore without meaning to cheap. This is not a manipulation tactic. It isn't about performing mystery to seem more impressive. It's simply what happens, reliably, when a person stops spending a finite resource on everything and starts spending it only on what matters. Scarcity, even unintentional scarcity, restores value to something that constant, careless use had quietly cheapened. Restraint isn't the absence of power. It is power stored, waiting for the moment it will actually matter, instead of being spent in 1,000 small moments that never did. It would be dishonest to pretend this practice is easy simply because it's simple to describe. So let's talk about exactly where it breaks down, because you will break it, probably today, possibly within the hour. The most common failure is confusing the reserve with suppression. You will at some point mistake not reacting for pretending you feel nothing, and stuff down something that genuinely needed to be said or felt. The reserve was never about numbness. If something requires an honest conversation, have it, deliberately, calmly, once, rather than either exploding immediately or swallowing it indefinitely. The goal isn't silence for its own sake. The goal is choosing when to speak instead of being spoken through by every passing impulse. The second failure is treating one bad day as proof the whole practice doesn't work. You'll wake up, forget the 10 minutes, check your phone first thing, get pulled into an argument you didn't need to have, and by evening, you'll feel exactly as drained as before you ever heard the word Stoicism. This is not evidence of failure. This is what practicing something difficult actually looks like. Inconsistent at first, imperfect for a long time, and slowly, almost invisibly, becoming default. Marcus Aurelius wrote the same reminders to himself again and again in his journal for a reason. He wasn't writing them because he had mastered them once and never needed the reminder again. He was writing them because even an emperor forgets constantly and has to return to the same discipline the next morning without shame. The third failure is trying to apply the reserve everywhere at once, all day from the first morning, and burning out on the effort of it within a week. Start with one leak, just one, the morning phone check, or the urge to defend yourself in arguments, or the compulsion to announce plans before they're real. Master the pause in that single situation before you try to master all of them simultaneously. A reserve is built one deposit at a time, not by a single act of willpower on day one. Imagine 6 months of protecting this instead of constantly spending it. You walk into a difficult room and you're not performing calm for the benefit of anyone watching. You actually have it because you haven't handed your morning away to a stranger's opinion before 8 a.m. for 6 months straight. Criticism still arrives, the way it always will. But now it lands on something solid, instead of on something already cracked from a dozen earlier withdrawals made before 9 a.m. You finish things quietly that you used to announce loudly, and you notice, almost with surprise, that the projects which used to die halfway were the ones you talked about the most before you'd built anything real. The announcing used to be the entire payoff. Now the payoff arrives afterward, when the thing actually exists and can speak for itself. People around you start to notice something they can't quite name. It isn't confidence exactly, though from the outside it looks like confidence. It's closer to solvency. You're no longer running a deficit. You have something in reserve, and it shows in the smallest moments. The argument you don't take the bait on, the update you don't feel compelled to give, the silence you can sit inside without needing to fill it with anything at all. Your relationships change too, and not because you're trying harder to be a better partner, parent, or friend. They change because you're finally present in them, not distracted, not half listening while composing your next sentence, not checking a phone under the table. People feel the difference between being talked at and being truly with someone, even if they could never explain the difference in words. And they respond to it, almost without exception, by trusting you more. Your own mind quiets in a way that has nothing to do with suppressing anything. It quiets because you've simply stopped inviting 1,000 small intrusions into it every single day. The chaos outside you doesn't disappear. The world stays exactly as noisy and demanding as it's always been. But you are no longer at its mercy. You're no longer reactive. You're responsive, deliberate, and, in the fullest Stoic sense of the word, sovereign over the one territory that was always actually yours to govern: your own mind. This is not a dramatic reinvention. Nobody around you will be able to point to a single before and after moment. It's a quiet, compounding shift in how you move through an ordinary day, the same days you've always had, spent completely differently. The Stoics never asked you to feel less. They asked you to spend what you feel more carefully, on the things that were actually worth it, and nowhere else. Somewhere today, in the next hour, you will be handed a small, unremarkable chance to explain yourself, to react, to announce something before it's ready, or to defend a decision that doesn't need defending. Before you do, ask the only question that actually matters. Is this a deposit or a withdrawal? Protect the reserve. Spend it on purpose, or don't spend it at all. That isn't withdrawal from your own life. It's finally becoming solvent enough to live it fully, on terms you actually chose,